of the 22nd Caribbean Internet Governance Forum, presented by the Government of Grenada and the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. I'm Kenroy Batiste. To our visitors and individuals staying at Radisson Grenada Beach Resort, a gentle reminder that the transport for the cruise on board the Ecstasy leaves the hotel at 6:30 this evening at the front lobby. Please leave your name at the registration desk to ensure you are on the bus. So please be mindful of that if you're interested in joining us on board the Ecstasy later for the cocktail reception. Dress code casual, remember that? Now, part of the annual CIGF is the Policy Forum. To take us through this segment, I invite to the stage Mr. Nigel Cassimire, Deputy Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and Ms. Shanea Lewis, Policy Analyst of the CTU. Joining online is Mr. Israel Rosas of the Internet Society. Please welcome them.
Thank you, Kenroy, and good afternoon, everyone. This second afternoon of our CIGF requires your interaction, right? This is where the forum actually comes to the fore. So we started off with the Policy Forum, where we address some current policy issue in the internet governance space. And for this edition, we will be looking at the recently concluded WSIS Plus 20 review. And for the uninitiated among us, that means World Summit on the Information Society. The Plus 20 is plus 20 years. That World Summit on the Information Society was concluded in 2005 by the United Nations, and subsequent to that, they've had annual Internet Governance Fora. And every 10 years, they've done a review of the operation of this multi-stakeholder Internet Governance Forum and the issues that it has cropped up over the years to see whether it makes sense to continue. So that happened in 2015, and in 2025, there was a 20-year review of that World Summit on the Information Society process. And coming out of that, there were some specific decisions taken. And those specific decisions will impact how internet governance is handled globally, that we here in the Caribbean have to take account of to apply in our region and also utilize in participating in the global forum. So we'll be examining some of the outputs and outcomes of that WSIS Plus 20 review process, which was a document that came out of the United Nations in particular. And, that was agreed in December of 2025. In 2024, however, the same UN had a process that produced a document that they call the Pact for the Future. That was agreed by the UN General Assembly, I think, in September of 2025. And as a part of that pact, what that intended to do was to document a global consensus on how the countries of the world would go forward in using digital technology into the future. A specific part of that Pact for the Future was something that specifically related to digital development. And that was a document called the Global Digital Compact. So both the WSIS Plus 20 review from December 2025 and the Global Digital Compact from 2024, both UN documents, deal with or impact our internet governance space. So we'll be getting a little information on both of those things this afternoon. And you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and make suggestions as to how we in the Caribbean might apply the outputs and outcomes of those documents. Now, we should have arranged for those documents to be available on the event page of this CIGF. So if you want to take a look ahead, you go to the event page under Documents and look for what we have available for you there. All right, so that's one of the things we're going to do this afternoon. But just before we get into that, we are giving the opportunity to LACNIC, and we heard from LACNIC this morning in the opening ceremony, to tell us about some of the, I'll just say, opportunities that are available from their outreach into the Caribbean. And again, I would like to invite Ms. Paula Oteguy, who is their head of stakeholder engagement, I believe, for our region, to make a short presentation on some of these opportunities, and then we'll get into the UN documents and the policies associated with it. So let me invite Paula. Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for the opportunity, and hello once again, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful lunch. So as Nigel said, continuing from the magnificent NRI session that we have, take just 5 minutes before the policy forum to share some information about the LACNIC program to support internet governance initiatives. So this is a program that has been restructured in terms of how it operates, but its main objective remains the same, that it is support internet governance initiatives across Latin America and the Caribbean, and of course to contribute to strengthening the multi-stakeholder approach in our region. So our program is open to different types of initiatives, including national, regional, and youth internet governance initiatives, as well as internet governance schools. So what does LACNIC support actually includes, for you to know? There are 3 main components. First, the financial assistance to help initiatives organize and carry out their activities. Second, it is access to a Zoom webinar account, which can accommodate up to 500 participants. And the third, and for our perspective, perhaps the most valuable component, the possibility of having LACNIC experts participating as speakers. But please let me spend a little more time on this last point, because we believe that the value of the program goes beyond simply providing financial or logistical support, which of course we know that it's very important. But when LACNIC participate as a speaker, our goal is not just to give a presentation about technical issues. What we want is to collaborate with the organizers in building the discussion agenda, and whenever possible, accompany the dialogue throughout the initiative. So this means connecting LACNIC technical expertise with the discussions and debates that are relevant to the local or regional community. So now let me briefly explain how can you apply and what is required for this NRI support program. Initiatives that want to receive support need to meet a number of basic requirements that you can know in our webpage, but I will tell you briefly. For example, they need to have a website, a multi-stakeholder organizing committee, and publicity available information about the event, about the participation agenda process, and so on. So the application itself is quite simple. the initiative needs to complete a form with a series of questions that help us to understand the event, the organizers, the audience, the topics that we will discuss, and the type of support that you are requesting. Just for you to know, one important point is to keep in mind the timing. Applications should be submitted at least 8 weeks before the events, and it is so important for us to give enough time to review the request and to coordinate with the organizers and so on. My last point, but the most important, I would like to highlight one particular aspect that is especially important, as I said, for us, and it is the Caribbean, right? We are now celebrating the Caribbean IGF. For LACNIC, it is very important to make this support opportunity better known among the national and regional internet governance initiatives in the Caribbean, especially. Over the past few years, we have had the opportunity to support initiatives in countries such as Trinidad and Tobago that we listened earlier today, Haiti and Dominican Republic. But we are very grateful. Of course, we are very grateful for those experiences because they have allowed us to engage with local communities and better understand the priorities and the challenges that they are facing. But we know that there are much more to do. So there are many other Caribbean countries, in the LACNIC coverage area. You know that LACNIC covered 33 territories, and some countries for the Caribbean, and other countries from the Caribbean are covered by airing. But for our coverage area, we want to, of course, to support you and to know better you and the initiatives. So our intention is to expand, as I said, this engagement and make sure that the Caribbean initiatives know that they can count on us, of LACNIC. So we will be very happy to hear about your initiatives, to understand what you are working on, and to explore how LACNIC might be able to contribute to your discussion, to your topics. To finish, I would like to encourage everyone here in the room and virtually, particularly those working on internet governance initiatives in the Caribbean, to learn more about the program and to consider applying for the supports. Again, please feel free to reach out to us. I can share in the chat, the link to the whole information of the program. So feel free to reach out, to have a conversation, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share the program with all of you. Thank you, Nigel, once again.
Thank you very much, Paula. Is the information available on your website right now?
Yes, it is. And I am right now sharing in the chat for you to know.
All right, very good. So LACNIC is offering some resources to help us with, putting on events in our own local jurisdictions. You might not have your own Zoom and whatever resources might be necessary, and LACNIC is offering itself as a possibility to support your work. So the link has been put into the chat on the Zoom. So if you are in the Zoom, you would have it there. You could go visit the site. And what I would ask too, Paula, is maybe if you could send us like a summary of what you just said. When I say like email to CTU, and we will pass it, something that we can pass on to our full mailing list so that we continue to get the word out. That's fine?
Yeah, Nigel, that sounds excellent for us. So I will be sending to you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Okay, so we'll move on then to the topic I had mentioned. We are going to look at what came out of that WSIS plus 20 process. So some specific decisions were made by the UN after that. Actually, that process, that review process took, I would say, probably about a year, maybe. Probably all of 2025, there were consultations, documents written, drafts made, and comments taken back and so on. And out of that came a particular document. The challenge with the UN documents is that they're always kind of dense as far as the text is concerned, right? You know, it's not usually usually the output is a resolution of the UN General Assembly, which takes a particular format. So the output is not like a study group report, for example, that will have diagrams and maybe structured in chapters and the like, right? It's basically a string of text that deals with issue by issue, but looking at it as a whole document, it's usually not so easy to digest. So we are going to hear from the Internet Society, Mr. Israel Rojas, and he is going to talk a little bit about what came out of the UN process, and he is going to look forward to implementing what has come out of that UN process and possibly how the different stakeholders can interface with each other in implementing what the UN has agreed. So let me introduce Mr. Israel Rojas from the Internet Society, and Isra, the floor is yours.
For the invitation. I'm happy to be here, even at a distance. I have a presentation. I'm not entirely sure if it's ready. If not, I can share that from my screen. And thank you, Nigel, for the introduction and the context about the WSIS plus 20 review. I think that you said it right. These documents, one of the challenges that we have with them is that they are dense, they are complex. So there are several commitments and opportunities for different stakeholders to implement as a result of this review. So review to advance and to deliver the impact that all of us would like to see in general terms about digital connectivity and digital development. So basically, the impact of the WSIS plus 20 commitments is related to not only the outcomes and commitments, a really great opportunity to have a brief conversation with you, but happy to continue the conversation over email. Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you to the team of the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum and to the host for this invitation.
Thank you for that, Israel. So ISOC has put out this paper, or non-paper, as it's called. It's, you know, you learn things when you participate in this internet governance space. A non-paper is an opinion, essentially, an unsolicited opinion that might come from different sources on current matters. It's put out there as, you know, to lead some thoughts and discussions, open some discussions. So this is the thinking behind ISOC's document that was just presented by Israel. Now, I'm not sure to what extent the persons in the room have been or are involved directly with internet governance matters or familiar with the action lines of the World Summit on the Information Society or the GDC or whatever. If I could get maybe a show of hands as to persons who might be familiar with something like WSIS plus 20 or the Global Digital Compact. I'm not seeing a lot of hands. So it looks like we have to do some teaching this afternoon in terms of getting feedback. Or maybe I could ask Isra as well. While I get my colleague Shanea Lewis to come up and probably give you an idea of what is in these two documents, what are some of the things that have been addressed in the two documents, you will find there's a lot of alignment between the two documents, as could be expected because they came from the same organization. But there are some parts, they don't address exactly the same issues. So a topic might be addressed in one, but not the other. But many are discussed in a common way in both documents. So I'll invite my colleague Shanea to join and probably share with you what our meaning CTU Secretariat's review of the two documents, of the alignment between the two documents is, and what that will show you is kind of the scope of what is covered in those things. And feel free to ask questions because it's all new to you. So we very much would be looking out to hear your feedback on, or your questions on any of the topics raised there. Maybe I could ask the two presenters if they maybe have any suggestions or points that you feel need to be highlighted in either of those documents for an audience that is largely uninitiated. So I'll open for any comments from Israel or Paula while we get Shanea to set up. Thanks. Okay, not hearing any comments from the presenters, so Shanea will go ahead.
So,
okay, and one of our presenters needs to leave, so that is Israel. Thank you very much there, Israel. We know we're running a little bit behind time, so.
So both the Global Digital Compact and the WSIS Plus 20 outcome document, which is a resolution, are both multilateral agreements. What they have in common, though, is that they both invited stakeholder feedback and comment, which were taken into account. Now,
just let me jump in there. I'll do this from time to time. In terms of nomenclature, understanding what we're saying, there are multilateral agreements. Multilateral is a term that is used meaning where you have multiple governments involved in an activity, right? So, whereas for internet governance, we talk about multi-stakeholder. Multi-stakeholder is more inclusive than multilateral because multilateral is really the governments of different countries coming together to deal with particular matters. So the UN, the United Nations, is an intergovernmental organization of countries. They've signed a treaty to work in this institution. That's a multilateral forum. In internet governance, we have representatives from government, from private sector, from civil society, academia, and the like. Those are not governments in the main, they are stakeholder groups. So we call that a multi-stakeholder environment, which is the environment in which internet governance operates. And in a multi-stakeholder environment, all those different stakeholders come together essentially on equal footing to discuss the matters, and they deal with the particular matter in their respective roles. So if you have matters that come up that might require legislation, you will find that the governments would have an opinion on that. if you have matters that come up that require technical standardization, you'll find that maybe the private sector or regulators or some other group being prime on that sort of development. So when she says two multilateral documents, it means it comes from an organization that involves governments principally. And even in the multilateral sphere in recent times, they've made allowances for other stakeholders to give opinions. But at the heart of it, it is the governments that take the decision in a multilateral organization, right? The governments are the core members. They might open spaces to get other opinions, but at the end of the day, the documents that come out of there are intergovernmental decisions. That's the distinction between multilateral and multi-stakeholder. So, go ahead.
Yes. So the Global Digital Compact, that was signed in 2024, and it references the process of the WSIS system. The WSIS Plus 20, which was signed in 2025, references certain aspects of the GDC, but they don't completely overlap. So on connectivity and digital divide, you can see they mostly align with a gap in statistical baseline. So in the WSIS Plus 20 document, we actually have name stats that we can reference where the GDC does not. Similarly, under digital economy, mostly aligned, but the Global Digital Compact does not have explicit or a counterpart stated for labor markets and automation impacts or digital financing services, mobile money. Under human rights, we see that there's a divergence. Media freedom and journalist safety. The GDC folds this into one information integrity action item, where the WSIS Plus 20 review gives it a standalone paragraph. The treaty article level citations obviously also differ, where the WSIS Plus 20 is more materially granular, citing specific treaty articles by number, where the GDC just references it generically. For internet governance, the GDC did not do what the WSIS did in naming the IGFs, and through the WSIS Plus 20 review, the IGFs were made permanent. The GDC just has a references to data governance without actually saying data governance. One of the contributions that the Caribbean made through the CTU was to have data governance specifically referenced in the WSIS Plus 20 document, and we received 2 to 3 paragraphs. Yes, 3 paragraphs, 81 to 83, on data governance. So the WSIS Plus 20 does not actually restate what the GDC has, but it is explicitly a section or a theme in its resolution.
So is that a prime example of where a Caribbean input was taken on board?
Yes.
So we've been talking about shaping the evolution of our region, moving from capacity to capability. So, and in this internet governance space in particular, there is room for even individuals to make a difference. So the input made by the CTU Secretariat, granted it may have in, coordinated other inputs from other territories, but the CTU Secretariat could make interventions on its own. An individual could make interventions on their own. Institutions could make interventions. Countries could make interventions. Any of these stakeholder groups is free to intervene. So this is a case where, at least just one, and there may be others that she'll point out, where our opinion made a difference to the final output of this UN document. So we're not kidding when we say the opportunity is there for us to make our voices heard and make it heard influentially. Okay, go ahead.
Moving on to artificial intelligence, we see there is little alignment here. So the substantive AI governance architecture, we find that more in the GDC with founding principles and institutional decisions, but with WSIS Plus 20, it actually treats AI governance as the GDC's domain. The GDC actually references a global fund on AI. Within the WSIS document, though, we do have an interagency working group that is doing capacity mapping with a deadline for this year.
And I think Israel did mention that there was a task force, an implementation task force associated with the WSIS Plus 20 as well?
Yes. Trust, safety, and security. So online harms, a topic which has been present for almost every IGF. They are both aligned virtually, word for word. However, they diverge on the international ICT or cybersecurity tracks, where the GDC explicitly scopes itself to the non-military domain, so it excludes disarmament or first committee tracks. The WSIS Plus 20, as a WSIS review text, simply references it. Environmental impacts. The WSIS Plus 20 document references e-waste, critical minerals, data centers, AI energy demand, where the GDC doesn't have a clause or names these things specifically. Financing mechanisms. They both align on shared calls for public-private multilateral investment to close the existing financing gaps. However, they diverge on different reference instruments. Within the WSIS, they have a dedicated financing gap task force. The GDC does not reference this. They are both aligned on capacity development. On follow-up and institutional architecture, they do diverge on review cycle density. So the WSIS Plus 20 builds substantially more review machinery through UNGIS, strengthening joint roadmap, which exists, the biennial Secretary General's reports, and regularly scheduled reviews from now until 2035. The GDC does not. There is no stated yet review period. On gender and vulnerable groups, they do diverge on disability access. So the WSIS Plus 20 was a bit more specific than the GDC by naming existing conventions like the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The GDC parallels its commitment, but it doesn't specify. And often that lack of specificity creates a loophole. So these are the alignments and gaps that we've identified so far between the two documents. And we've also included the paragraphs. So this document will be uploaded to the event page, so you can actually go to the documents and review them paragraph by paragraph.
Let me ask a question. Our themes for this, key themes in this CIGF include AI and cybersecurity. Where would you find items related to that? One is AI there, yes. And when you say divergent, it doesn't necessarily mean one says one thing and another says another. It means that one maybe addresses it and another doesn't? Or do they say opposite things?
No, they don't say opposite things. One is more explicit than the other.
Right, okay. A relevant, I don't want to say consideration, but a situation that arose with the two documents is that in 2024, when the GDC came out in 2024, but by the time the WSIS plus 20 document was finalized in December of 2025, there was a change of administration in the United States, and they had some very significant policy changes between 2024 and 2025. So that, and well, the United States is just one country in the UN, but is a very influential country in the UN. And since the objective is to get consensus on these documents coming out of the General Assembly, there would have been occasion where maybe language might have been tweaked to keep on board that consensus that would have applied at the time of the GDC. In fact, in 2025, even the venerable Sustainable Development Goals that were agreed by the UN in 2015 with a target of 2030, the US has, what's the right word? Disavowed, maybe, certain provisions in there so that the same global consensus around the Sustainable Development Goals is not as it was before 2025. So I think the lesson is that basically we have the two documents coming out of the UN, and we can use it to guide our digital developments in the Caribbean, and we need to take advantage of the opportunities that we have to influence the further developments and agreements taking place at the UN. Now, as mentioned, we've seen specific cases where inputs made by our Caribbean region have been taken on board in these documents. So that encourages us to make our voice heard. And this is not just in the UN, this happens in the ICANN, in the technical fora as well, at the ITU, and that's the International Telecommunication Union, and the internet organizations like ICANN and ARIN, LACNIC, and the rest. And these organizations, many of them are looking to enhance the participation of the Caribbean in their operations. So the opportunity is there. It's incumbent upon us to really raise the profile of the Caribbean in all of these, and the CTU is there to assist us with that. If anyone is interested, they can, contact your local ICT organizations, but you can also contact the CTU as well through our website or email to any of us. As I said as well, we made available the documents on the event page, so you can look at them and see what you can gather from there. I wasn't sure if ICANN wanted to make an intervention. at this point? Because I saw a camera come on and go off. No? Okay.
No. I was just following, and since you mentioned I thought I would just make myself available. I'm about to board my flight to Grenada.
Ah, okay, very good, very good. So probably we'll see you tomorrow, please God. Thank you. All right. That's with Mr. Albert Daniels, of course.
You see me
Okay,
tonight.
yes. All right, so essentially in this particular session, we wanted to highlight those two key documents coming out of the UN and to let you know some of the aspects that it addressed. In the next session, which I would say we could probably get into right away, we're going to be looking at our Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework. So this is the product of our CIGF over the years that we've issued on 4 separate occasions now and are now reviewing again to make preparations for the 5th edition. Not quite sure if it'll be done by next year as yet, but in the very near future. And that document, our Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework, addresses many of these matters that we've just presented to you that the UN addressed in the GDC, the Global Digital Compact, and the WSIS Plus 20 review. So I think we could probably get into that session now. It's a little bit difficult in that most of the room isn't quite involved in this, and it's all new to you. But still, you can ask the questions. Nothing is a stupid question. You know, everything would need some explanation or understanding, right? So I'm inviting you all who are in the room to basically ask questions, and that would help us as well to guide the discussion along a certain path. All right, so we'll go on now on to our next session is really looking at the Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework. And as I said, we are reviewing it right now towards its 5th edition. And part of that review process, I would say the formal part of that review process is in the annual forum. But we've also added in some intersessional activities. And we've had at least 2 consultations between the last CIGF and this one. And we'll be talking a bit about those and putting it out to the floor for you to make your comments, because that's what we need in order to take the work forward. There was a PowerPoint that you had.
Yes, on the consultations.
Yes, okay. All right, so we'll, I guess, present this as a background to that before we go on. Okay. Are you in? Does it have the table of contents in it? No. No, okay, well, I'll start with this. Can you save, not save, but share? Okay, thank you. They'll be shortly projecting up the what we're sharing here, which is the Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework. If you could share what Shanea is sharing on Zoom. There you go. Thank you. All right. So after every Caribbean Internet Governance Forum, what we do is we summarize the issues discussed and take away any consensus that has been formed in the room. right? And over the first 3-4 years of the CIGF, we produced this output document, which we've called a Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework. And as you can see, this is the current issue. It's issue 4.0. To give you an idea of what is in this document, this is what the table of contents contains. All right, a short introduction giving some of the background, and the next section deals with the aims of the policy framework. There's a working definition on internet governance in here, and when I talked yesterday sometime, I did mention that, right, at the introductory session, that working definition comes from the original World Summit on the Information Society back in 2005. And it kind of defines the scope of what internet governance was at the time. And it's an open question as to whether that working definition is still sufficient to carry us forward in this age of data governance and artificial intelligence and the like. So there's that definition of internet governance. It has as well a vision for Caribbean Information Society. It has a mission for internet governance and certain guiding principles. And the core of this policy framework is identifying what are the key policy themes of highest priority for the Caribbean. Given that internet governance could involve actions by governments, actions by private sector, actions by civil society actors, and so on, the range of matters it addresses is very wide. And from the outset, we realized, okay, well, maybe we can't tackle everything. What do we do first? Back in 2005, connectivity was very low. So the connectivity aspects were the highest priority. And even then, I would say back then, there were even some of our Caribbean territories that were having problems with reliable electricity. So something as basic as electricity was part of the infrastructure development that needed to be prioritized at that time. As the editions have progressed, there's been less emphasis on that kind of basic infrastructure and more on the broadband connectivity. In 2005, we weren't even saying broadband connectivity, it was just connectivity. Now it's broadband connectivity because everything you need to do on the internet, you need broadband. Right? So it identified the current edition identifies 6 key policy priorities. One is the infrastructure for connectivity, and we're talking broadband connectivity there. The second relates to the internet technical infrastructure and operations management, and that's the IP, the internet protocol infrastructure, and we talked about a lot of it yesterday. Internet exchange points, root servers, building capacity in terms of use of these IP type facilities. That's another layer. Beyond the pure broadband connectivity, the internet layer that runs on top of that. And then the SG mentioned over-the-top services. So when the infrastructure is there, and the connectivity is there, and the internet infrastructure is there, we now use that to do services. So we run, calling services over the internet, we run banking services over the internet, we run lots of different things. So those are the over-the-top services that run over the internet. And those give rise to, legal issues. We need to run them securely. So cybersecurity is part of the discussion there as well. Internet content development. We want to put local content on the internet. That was a high priority, has been a high priority for us, right? And then public awareness and capacity building. We still recognize that as an ongoing and key factor to further driving the development and use of the internet throughout the Caribbean. And then also the sixth area is research, really research and measurement, monitoring our use of the internet. That would give us indicators as to how it's growing, whether what we are doing is being effective or not, and guiding us in taking strategic actions to grow and build the internet in our region. In the policy framework as well, we define an operational structure for the ongoing development of policies related to the internet. And the current framework involves the CTU and the CIGF and lots of other stakeholders as well. And then the last part is like measuring and monitoring in terms of progress and periodic review of the policy framework. As you can see, it's not a very long document. The core of it is like 20 pages. And the section 3, which shows the priorities, runs from page 6 to page 16. That is like 10, 11 pages itself. So I would say it's a very digestible document that for persons who are new to the area, it's available on the CTU website, and I think we put it into the event page. Right, it's there right there on the event page for this CIGF, and I would encourage you to go take a quick look at it. If I look at I mentioned that working definition there earlier. This is the working definition part of it. The development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. Now, one might say, that's fine, of the internet, right? But AI, does AI fall into there? That's one of the questions that we actually have. In fact, it was raised last year's forum. To what extent should we put in a section here on AI? Or do we need to refine this working definition we have for the internet to include something wider that could incorporate all these new developments that are coming in? Those are open questions. It's not only questions that before us here in the Caribbean, right? On the global stage is also questions related to, at the UN IGF, for example, those questions have arisen. And there was a school of thought, I haven't heard it in more recent years, that was saying, well, maybe we shouldn't call it the Internet Governance Forum anymore. Maybe it should be the Digital Governance Forum, and that may yet still happen, notwithstanding that the UN last year made a permanent institution of their Internet Governance Forum. And in fact, they've been incorporating those themes like AI and data governance and so on into the discussions at that Internet Governance Forum. So one may not be too hard on the semantics of it, but note that the same space is being used to address these matters. So as I said, it includes a vision for the Caribbean Information Society, and this was vintage, at least this was current up to January 2024 when we issued it. Knowledge-based, digitally empowered, inclusive society with strong identity and leadership in the global information society. So we want a Caribbean identity, and we want to be leaders in the development of that global internet society. And the mission statement is a lot more involved because it has multiple bullet points talking about universal access, but it must be open, equitable, affordable, and so on. Ample infrastructure capacity, developing a vibrant digital economy in the Caribbean, and meaningful Caribbean participation in the global processes, right? So the key principles are standard, flexible approaches, capacity building for all, regulation in competitive markets, resilience of infrastructure and services, and the like. And then we have the core, which is the six priority policy themes. 1, infrastructure for connectivity. 2, internet technical infrastructure and the like. So this one page gives you a sense of what's in that policy framework. And the subsequent pages build out in a little more detail each of these 6. All right, so when we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about affordable, inclusive, meaningful connectivity. And that was a term that became vogue probably within the last 5 years or so. When they say meaningful connectivity, they mean connectivity that allows you to effectively use the services on the internet. All right, without necessarily defining it as broadband, but it must be meaningful to you. And then minimum standards. I mentioned the IP layer, IP addressing, domain management, the thing that ICANN controls, critical internet infrastructure, which we talked about yesterday, and technical standards. Legal and regulatory frameworks, this includes the cybercrime and, I should say the internet infrastructure part also includes the technical cybersecurity aspects. The legal and regulatory frameworks deals more with the cybercrime aspects. How do you prevent crime, and how do you prosecute or enforce laws on the internet when you have bad actors doing what they're doing? Internet content development and management, public awareness and capacity building, and research. So essentially what we're doing in this workshop and at each Caribbean Internet Governance Forum is reviewing what's, should I say, developments in the whole sector of internet governance and seeing what impact or changes we need to make in this document as time passes and technology moves on, right? So in the past couple years, we've looked at some of the other sections, but in this last year, we had consultations in 2 areas. One was a question we raised last year, which was, what about data governance? Have we explicitly and sufficiently addressed data governance in this document? And what about cybersecurity? We have new challenges with respect to use of AI and the like for good and bad in terms of cybersecurity. So how do we take that into account in evolving this particular document? Just as a for instance, the first priority topic is infrastructure for connectivity. The detail of it would show you what are the key issues we would have identified, and for each key issue, what are some of the priority recommendations we in the CIGF would have identified. And for each of those priority recommendations identified, who are the primary actors to make that happen, right? So this document is not really intended to contain the actual policies themselves, but it is or the details of the policies themselves, but it is there to identify the specific areas in which we need to develop policies and by whom, right? So we might have something in here related to AI or cybersecurity that says we should develop common technical standards based on some universal or ITU-related technical standards, for example, right? But it will remain the purview of our individual states to implement that. But at least the guidance will be here in this document as a common document put together by the consensus of the forum to guide our individual governments as to what are the points of priority that we need to address. Right? So that is what the detail of this particular document is. And in evolving it as technology moves on, we would ultimately need to examine the text in here and see what changes need to be done. So I'll say in the last year, we've done at least 2 consultations, one on data governance, one on cybersecurity, the results of which I'll let Shanea do a presentation on right now, and you will have the opportunity then to ask questions about what you see or make further suggestions in addition to what the consultations might have come up with. All right, so with that background, hopefully you have a sense of where we are in the exercise, and you will hear what some of the feedback was with respect to those consultations. So, Shanea, all yours.
Okay, good. So as Mr. Cassimire said, we had 2 intersessional consultations, data governance and cybersecurity. And the reason we did this was because since 2024, there have been the Global Digital Compact, the WSIS Plus 20 outcome, advancements in AI and cryptography, as well as an increase in attacks within the region, which brought the focus on cybersecurity. Now, while the purpose of the framework doesn't change, we need to ensure that it is relevant. So we review it periodically to update it to make sure it addresses the current situation in the region. So for the data governance consultation, we asked, does data governance belong inside the framework or alongside it with an additional document? What are the current gaps, and is data governance within the scope of internet governance? With cybersecurity, we looked at the CARICOM impacts cybersecurity and cybercrime action plan, and we considered the 6 themes, whether they were underserved, and what should change before the next edition. So, there's currently no specific definition of data governance. So we looked at a combination of 3 and came up with the frameworks, policies, rules, and institutions that govern how data is collected, stored, processed, shared, transferred, and used. So this involves legal and regulatory frameworks, data quality and security policies, standards and interoperability, ethics and protection of rights, and oversight mechanisms. This matters because there are 3 areas where the current framework is not silent, but somewhat omits, which is data ownership, cross-border data flows, and data generated outside of internet transactions that are then used on the internet. So we asked the question, should there be one framework splitting the material across 2 instruments risk losing the audience of the framework that has taken years to build? The idea was a single mechanism keeps stakeholders engaged with one text, but it was noted that data governance is a significant part of a matter of content rather than carriage. So it may fall outside the portfolio of telecommunications regulators. Which regulators are the right which regulators are fit in each territory is now an open research question for the Secretariat, because regulators only do what they are supposed to, which is dictated by law. So if this falls outside of their mandate, we now have to ask the question, then whose mandate is it? Is it now an additional institution rather than an additional document? So we considered, instead of just simply internet governance and data governance, what about digital governance? Digital governance will now incorporate the internet, data, and the systems like AI that utilize both. Because we have data that is generated offline, but what are the regulations for when that offline data is now put online? So we came to 3 conclusions. We identified harmonization. The territories start from different legal and institutional positions, which makes harmonization across the Caribbean difficult, not just slow. We got the input to look at universal acceptance, where participants proposed that the principles of universal acceptance be integrated into the discussion, and it was noted that the language of the framework is only in English. Yet, even within CTU's membership, we have several non-speaking English countries or bilingual countries. The Secretariat was asked to explore interpretation and translation for these products to ensure that it better serves the region. On cybersecurity, do we have any questions on data governance? Yes.
Afternoon, everybody. If we go back to, if we're speaking data governance, I noticed that you would have broken it down into different parts. But I'm seeing a critical item that is missing when we're speaking about data governance, which is classification of data.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I realized I actually created an image that maps the flow of the data, and it's listed there. So what I'll do is include that image when we upload to the website. Yes. Any other questions?
We encourage questions. We encourage questions or comments. Actually, we need your comments as well. So
Yes.
just to let you know that in the international space, one needs to intervene if you have a doubt, because essentially silence means consent, right? So to say nothing is to say, well, I'm good with what's there, right? So if you have a doubt, raise a question.
Yes,
There
Bevel?
seems to be a question, yes.
Yeah, Bevel Wooding, Aaron. Just wanted to get a sense of if any kind of inventory has been done or assessment of what has happened in that data governance space since 2024, and if that can be used as a form of a proxy to understand to what extent any kinds of revisions may be necessary for the document.
That is included in the next steps.
Okay. So some form of a regional audit has been done?
No, to have one done.
To have one done?
Yes.
Yes, so I am not sure if the answers to these questions are going to be answered in the next section, but there were 2 things I just needed a bit of clarification on during the first part of the presentation. Number 1, you spoke quite a bit about AI and the need for us to address it within the framework. But I have a concern with the service providers here who are supplying devices that are already close to end of life. where security patches, updates, and so they're not going to get it. If we're looking at cybersecurity and we're looking at it through the lens of communication and technology, is there any room to provide some guidance in the framework to these service providers? Number one. And number two, I know we had a conversation several years ago about IPv6 and its adoption. Where are we right now? Because again, when it comes to, and yes, I know logs, what have you, but when it comes to the law enforcement side, the investigative side of cybersecurity and so forth, we know that it makes our job a little easier if we're dealing with IPv6 than IPv4. So where are we within the region in terms of moving to IPv6? And what is it, if there is anything, really stopping us from getting better adoption?
Oh. Actually, I see a hand from Shanea online.
Oh, okay. Well, we also have Aaron in the room. I don't
Yes.
know if Bevel might have some information about the IPv6 aspect of the question. Maybe I could stop and see.
I do, but we can let Shannon go first. I'm going to pull up the 2026 IPv6 rankings and send it to you so you can to the on screen so people can see where their country is currently ranked, and we can build a discussion on that.
Okay. Shannon, you can go ahead.
Yes, okay, good afternoon to everyone. Shanea Lewis, Strategic Advisor, Consultant with the CTU. If we look at the CCSCAP, that's the CARICOM Cybercrime and Cybersecurity Action Plan, which was discussed yesterday by Candice Saunders of CARICOM Impacts. It focuses on 6 areas. And one of these areas is what we call the technical standards. And in that particular chapter, it deals exactly with all the discussion that, I'm not sure who was addressing it. For example, IPv6, IPv4. So all the technical standards needed for the internet to function, all are addressed in that particular chapter. So yes, indeed, we have been focusing on standards holistically, of which, let's say, IPv6 also is being addressed in that particular chapter. So that's basically the contribution that I wanted to give.
Maybe I could jump in as well with a comment on the handsets comment that was made. My initial thought was that maybe that's a little bit too detailed an issue for this policy framework document, but one could possibly consider putting something in the vein of recommending that that service providers maintain current technology in the market or something of the sort, rather than be pushing soon to be obsolete type of equipment. So it could be, that idea could be put in as something, as a statement along that line, that maybe that should be part of the policies that a local government could put in place. You ready? Yes. So Bevel is all ready with some data now related to the IPv6 question.
So the data I'm about to share can actually be found on the ARIN website, arin.net, and on the LACNIC website, lacnic.net. And it speaks to the most recent rankings for IPv6 deployment in the Caribbean. This is a survey that we do every year, and get the information on screen. I'll give you the top 10, and you will very quickly see who is not there. So in the top 10 right now, we have starting with number 1, St. Bartholomew, St. Bart.
Puerto Rico, number 2, Suriname, number 3, French Guiana, 4th, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Martinique, Belize, Dominican Republic, and Guyana. And these are the top 10 adopters of IPv6 over the past 12 months. As I said, the rankings change annually, but you will notice that a number of the Eastern Caribbean countries are outside of the top 10. So if you go down, down, down some more, down some more again, and a little more again. Yeah, there you saw it. Number 19, St. Lucia. 20, BVI. Keep going. 25, Grenada. 26, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The thing I also want you to note is the relative position to the last ranking, which is a column on the right. And that shows negative growth for St. Vincent, for example, and very, very small growth for Grenada. Now, there's several reasons for this, and it has to do with how, so V6 is available both in the ARIN region and in the LACNIC region. So availability or accessibility to it is not an issue. What we have found is that organizations, companies, particularly in the private sector, that should be getting their own number resources either don't know that they could and should be getting it, or they are not aware exactly of the process toward making those applications. And the other thing that we found on the technical side is that network operators, the engineers who use these numbers to build out the networks, are still operating from a position of scarcity, which of course was the default practice under IPv4. So now that you have V6 available in allocations that are greater than the original internet to small businesses and small companies, getting them to change how they design networks is proving to be a very difficult challenge. And part of that is not so much just on the technical side, it has to do with how organizations resource and train their technical personnel. So you're seeing a multi-layered issue now. The V6 is now available. There has been now going on almost 20 years of advocacy within the Caribbean for IPv6 adoption, but slow is the turn toward actually implementing it within the organizations. And so we use these numbers and these rankings to create a different angle of sight into the challenge. So when countries see, for example, St. Kitts saw when this came out that they were at the very bottom of the ranking, the Minister of St. Kitts asked, why were we there? Now, the Minister may not be familiar with V6 or what it does or how it gets deployed or who deploys it, but all he knows is that St. Kitts is at the bottom of the barrel. And so that triggers a conversation. And we're hoping that by publicizing the rankings, that conversation can take place in a different way in each of the territories so that there can be a greater push toward adopting this very important protocol. How does this fit into the CIGF policy document? The answer to that question, I turn you back over to Mr. Nigel Cassimire.
Well, I would say IPv6 is already in the policy framework document as part of the recommendations under the second priority area, Internet Technical Operations and Management. So there is a recommendation in there for policies to promote the adoption of IPv6. And if I'm not mistaken, it might even be mentioned making it a factor in the procurement of IT-related equipment. But I'm very certain we've put in there the IPv6 thing. You're looking at it, Shanea?
Yes, it's on screen. Promote and support accelerated adoption of IPv6 routing, CCTLDs to provide the services immediately, new procurements to be IPv6 ready, government leadership, limit or reject import of IPv4 only equipment, promote and support IPv6 educational incentives.
All right, there you go. So it's there. And from Bevel's statistics, we can see that the capability is there. The volume isn't necessarily growing as quickly as we would like everywhere, but if you look at the top 10, some of them are already at 30-something% or more IPv6 traffic as opposed to V4. So it's there, and the policy recommendation is there. So you can. Any other comments, questions? All right, we can go ahead.
So on to the cybersecurity consult.
Just before, I forgot that I didn't note Deirdre Williams' comment about electricity. I didn't make a comment about electricity, that it was a bigger deal back in 2005, and she's reminding me that it's still very important. And in fact, it might be making a comeback because of AI. Because to run AI in the region, you would need these special data centers that have a particularly high electricity demand that could strain the electricity grids in our country. So we take that on board. We take that comment on board. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So the CARICOM Cybersecurity and Cybercrime Action Plan was reviewed and compared to the cybersecurity aspects of the framework. The action plan has 6 thematic areas: public awareness, capacity building, technical standards, policy, incident management, regional and international cooperation. And they were ranked from 0 to 4, with 0 being no mention, 1 mentioned, 2 policy assigned, 3 funded plans, and 4 implementation underway. So for public awareness and education, we saw it was delivered regionally, more efficient than country-by-country efforts, with ICANN's virtual DNSSEC training coordinated through Canto with ISPs across several territories, achieved real economies of scale. There were train-the-trainer models regionally with knowledge into national communities, which was more cost-effective. There were online deliveries of MOCs, which extends the same reach. And we identified the human element. So human error remains the leading cause of breaches. Children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities need sustained, targeted efforts. The initiatives often fail to reach ordinary citizens and are frequently not sustained. On the basis of the participants' questions, whether a coverage rating of 3 was more accurate for that area. Who delivers awareness and who pays for it? In everything, funding resources are an issue. So we looked at channels and institutions, the CTU to convene open public forums, not only awareness campaigns on cybersecurity, AI, large language models, and the environmental and health impacts of large data centers. Radio programming and cybersecurity in school curriculum, civil society groups, and internet society chapters for grassroots delivery. The funding sources identified were the Internet Society Foundation, which offers grants to NGOs and their chapters. ESG-type funds from operators, including the Liberty Foundation and the Digicel Foundation. Yes, that should be. Environmental and social groups, as well as European Union mechanisms. So we want to find a design for sustainability before we actually seek more funding. One-off activities are not built for longevity, which won't achieve lasting impact. Technical standards, incentivize, don't mandate. So the question was put whether RPKI, DNSSEC, IPv6, and ASPA adoption should carry smart timelines for the next 18 to 24 months. The reasons not to mandate were mandatory raises an unresolved question of who holds authority over ISPs and IT companies. Telecommunications regulators do not reach every relevant entity. Universities run their own networks. ISPs do not decide on technical merit alone. Suggested options that work instead were to demonstrate the value of the technology, awareness that shows the case, to cite standards in the framework as examples, not binding requirements. Reference broader frameworks like the NIST and the ISO 27000 series.
Yes, on that particular point about citing standards in the framework of examples, that has been the practice, right? We normally would say, rather than say at a particular, we have to meet a particular standard, it would say international standards, a general thing, consider international standards, for example, so and so and so and so. So we do, in fact, that is in fact the intention, even at present.
And it was noted during the session that LACNIC, ARIN, and ICANN already promote these standards, with ARIN offering largely funded RPKI and ASPA training, and they're willing to coordinate sessions tailored to the Caribbean. We noted that standards are not static. So quantum computing threatens the current cryptographic methods, including those underpinned by RPKI. The United States has set a 2027 deadline for quantum resilient measures. The ecosystem has 3 layers. We have the telecommunications, the protocols, the applications. So any standards discussion should say which one it addresses. DNS stability sits in ICANN's 4th strategic objective. Evidence on implementation status across the Caribbean should aid decisions. Methodologies still to be determined, though. Capacity building must carry through to implementation. So knowledge acquisition alone does not change deployment. Structured follow-through is required. The region should express its demand for advanced English language material on RPKI and DNSSEC collectively, with a joint Caribbean Pacific project proposed as a possible vehicle for DNS resilience work. Policy and regulatory frameworks. The recurring failure identified was harmonization initiatives stall when the impetus originates outside the countries themselves. So HIPCA was cited as the ideal, with national sovereignty always sitting in tension with regional approaches, leaving persuasion and demonstrated benefits as the tools actually available. What unblocks it? Articulating the true economic value for each country. What generates political will and secures parliamentary adoption. Making prioritization criteria explicit. Situating instruments within the CARICOM single ICT space. 2 gaps were identified. Economic development is underemphasized in Caribbean internet governance relative to other regions. And while the CTU does hold an MOU with the Caribbean Agency for Justice Solutions, no recent initiative has focused specifically on cybersecurity awareness within the legal and judicial community. There is a large CSIRT gap in the region, where in some territories, they rely on the foreign equivalent rather than having a national CSIRT. These arrangements are not adapted to local contexts, and they become points of contention during national-level cyber incidents. The CTU is working with a partner organization on regional CSIRT development. However, the details are not yet public. And as previously identified, we have a problem sharing information. Sharing between national teams is frequently blocked because the enabling national legislation does not exist. Minimum standards for CSIDs, coordination recommendations, and model legislation were all recommended. So, we looked at a federated response ecosystem, not a central one, where you have a national CSID with national coordination, which involves the government, healthcare, manufacturing, major operators, and the key institutions. And they would be supported by CTU, ARIN, LACNIC, ICANN, and CARIBNOG, which is the Caribbean Network Operators Group. A recent national consultation process in 3 Caribbean countries indicated, though, a preference for sector-based CSIDs operating alongside an all-encompassing national CSID. On incident management, the minimum contents for a CSID included defining its scope, a responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed matrix, standardized incident response documentation alongside sign-off by all relevant parties. So when the service simply stops, a citizen unable to, for example, fill a prescription because the pharmacy system was offline, when internet-dependent services fail, ordinary citizens are often left without recourse. We identified this example as the need for having contingencies. Instead of simply relying solely on the internet, we already know in the region our internet capacity is not 100%. There will be an outage at some point, and even if it's 5 minutes, those 5 minutes could be critical. What do we have in place when that happens? Regional and international cooperation. So, what change will our participation bring, and how do our activities align with that organization's strategic goals? Not all Caribbean needs can be met by every international organization. The new ICANN space for small island developing states meets exactly this clarity of intended outcome. The CTU supported ICANN in creating this space because we realized that in their environment, while small islands are individually present, collectively, there wasn't a voice. These meetings happen regionally in different countries. And as we all know, getting out of the Caribbean to go, for example, Europe, the Middle East, it is quite costly. Just from Trinidad to Grenada, it's unexpectedly costly. And this is a disadvantage not just to our islands, but to all SIDS. So ICANN now has a space where SIDS are represented. You can voice your concerns, your opinions, for the ICANN board to now consider. We also looked at naming the division of labor. So CTU operates at the policy level. In cybersecurity, CARICOM impacts is at the level of implementation. The framework should say so and articulate the regional-national interface. Resourcing. Adequate and diversified funding is a precondition for regional cooperation and should not be an afterthought. So the closing argument on the matrix was that policy attention settles on visible, above-the-surface challenges. The greater danger lies in converging forces below the surface. So AI consolidation, capability centered among a small number of companies raises questions of data sovereignty, cultural influence, intellectual capacity and trade, asymmetry of leverage. Having a few mega companies now command more resources than entire countries, sharply limiting what small Caribbean governments can require. Quantum convergence. With AI consolidation, the two most prominent near-term threats. Both need future casting, not reacting. Any questions?
I see a hand up from Tracy Hackshaw online. Tracy, go ahead.
Thanks, Nigel. Are you hearing me okay? Yes?
Yeah, hearing you.
I just wanted to pick up on the information sharing issue. As some of you know, I am in charge of a project at the United Nations that is looking at this across a particular sector. And in doing that, we have found some interesting challenges and opportunities with regards to how information is shared about cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And it seems to me that if we were to take the learning from something like this into the Caribbean, there could be a model that would be useful to be looked at. And to do this, just to explain what I'm saying, what we are trying to do is bring the public sector, so the government, so the entities who operate within the public sector who are either in one way victims of attacks and or serving a lot of stakeholders, and bringing them together with the supply chain that works with them. So that is the entire, well, for a better word, all of the entities that serve the public sector, which will be primarily the private sector, but also including academia, NGOs, and so on. And also to have sort of a regional expert bed that would live within this entity, we were calling it an ISOC. But the ISOC is not a new term, it's an existing term. I think without something like this, and just giving you my learning from experience thus far, of course, we're doing it on a global level, so it's, I guess, scale a bit higher. But in terms of the regional issues that were raised, I think without something like a vehicle along these lines, you'll be spending top and mud, as we say. So having the certs talk about being certs or not having enough certs and so on is one thing to discuss, but it doesn't seem to bring up what else you need to do in terms of information sharing and collaboration. So I'd want to advocate for some kind of hub, maybe that the policy framework can now work on this. I don't know if it's going to come out of the impacts document or the policy framework itself, but it sounds as if one of the solutions, not the solution, one of the solutions would be to move beyond saying you should do something, and people know my thoughts on this, and actually doing something. So implementing some kind of information sharing platform for threat intelligence, for training, for awareness, to have materials available, so recorded materials or materials that can be shared, like infographics, whatever needs to be there in a centralized location where anyone can access on the one hand, and then for the actors within the sectors to share information confidentially that they may need to. So when you share information, you've been attacked, or you suffer ransom, whatever's happened, you don't need to publicize it in the way that will normally come out in the media, but you can actually share very, very minute details with other players in the sector to bring learnings to the table, and maybe to even have experts within the sectors coming together on a pro bono or a low-cost basis to assist with forensics and that kind of thing that is seems to be a bit disorganized right now in the region and heavily reliant on vendors, which I didn't really want to say that, but it seems that you rely a lot on, when something happens, to just go to a private sector company at a cost, and then this cycle continues. So something seems to be missing, and this is based on my learning, and I think something like a hub of this nature could be a good recommendation for the policy framework, maybe a recommendation at a policy level, and then have impacts implemented at an operational level. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, we're open. So all of those were comments and suggestions that arose in the consultations, yeah?
Yes. I see one question online. What, if any, responsibilities do service providers have in cybersecurity and data governance?
It's an interesting question. And it may vary when you go from country to country or region to region, in the sense that it may be changing a little bit now, but in the past, the service providers were, in the States, the service providers were protected from liability in terms of the content that might have been placed on their networks, right? But as we're finding some changes taking place in that posture, right? As I suppose the content providers become more, well, I don't know if it's powerful or what, but there have been, I recall seeing a case recently in the States whereby it was looking to erode that traditional protection for service providers from objectionable content, for liability for objectionable content. But to my mind, I don't see how a service provider could control that. I would say that to the extent that they have reasonable controls or act expeditiously in cases where suspicious or objectionable content might be present on their networks, to remedy the situation. If they ignore it, well, maybe that's something else. But if they act expeditiously to remedy the situation, I think they would minimize their liability. I don't see how practically a service provider could be held accountable for something like that. Floor still open? Okay. So maybe go ahead with your last part.
Both consultations had some common areas. The scope of the framework document, data governance, AI and data center impacts all press at the boundary of internet governance. So the question was, should the scope of the framework be widened? Persuasion over prescription. Incentives, demonstrated value, and economic benefit beat mandates the region cannot enforce. Sustainability is a design choice. Build programs for longevity before seeking funding carry capacity building through to implementation. Federation over centralization, distributed capability coordinated nationally and regionally rather than single points of authority. Reach the people we usually miss: children, the elderly, persons with disabilities, rural and non-technical citizens, non-English speakers. Sovereignty is a deep question. So data processed abroad, foreign CSIRTs, concentrated AI, three faces of one structural concern, as well as a drafting requirement, distinguish service unavailability from internet outage, and name which layer of the ecosystem a standard addresses. So, our next steps, and how do you take part? Coming out of the cybersecurity consultation, we developed a questionnaire based on the questions Mr. Shanea Lewis, who led the consultation, proposed. It's a follow-up cybersecurity questionnaire that has been circulated within our internet governance community. If you registered to attend the 22nd CIGF, you would have received it via email as well. We also recommend you review the digital governance framework published by WDG, and send your comments to CTU. Also, you can send written submissions to CIGF@ctu.int. Your comments, your recommendations, if you think we should focus on one particular area rather than the two, or you have already identified key issues that the framework omits, as well as the acting agencies. We also want to give a special thank you to everyone who took part in these consultations, which allowed me to develop a report that I just presented to you.
The last one?
Yes.
No, don't stop sharing. Anybody in this room might have seen such a questionnaire? No? All right, so we need to reach out again, I would say. And then maybe go back one slide and let me see if we could get any opinions in the room, at least on right, that one. I sense energy declining. So, number one says data governance, AI and data center impacts. No, that's not what I'm looking for. What's the slide after this one? Yes, both had in common. I guess the question is that I wanted to really ask is whether I mentioned that thing about internet governance and digital governance, and would be happy to get any comments from the room in terms of what you think should be the way going forward. Should we, number one, my baby, it doesn't make too much of a difference as long as we're discussing the issues. Number two, internet governance is really good enough. Number three, I think we should change it to digital governance because of X, Y, or Z. You know, as things are evolving. So any comments on the nomenclature going forward? Not really. I mean, people looking like they neither here nor there. And then the other thing was the two consultations were data governance and cybersecurity. Right? On the data governance side, one of the questions that arose was, should we incorporate those aspects into the current policy framework, the current internet governance policy framework, or should we develop something separate and on the side for data governance? That question is also open for comments. All right, so what we will do in such an instance, we're not getting any further comments. What we will do is basically put out the Secretariat's recommendations in terms, and it will appear in terms of what the continued evolution of the policy framework would look like. And again, we'll put it out there for any comments to come in. And like I said, if you're happy enough with how things are going, well, fine. If you have a doubt, raise a question, because the process will go forward unless some specific comments or changes are requested. Right? As I say, silence means consent in this environment. I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
All right, this is just a takeaway from going through the entire document. I noticed there's a lot of recommendations as part of the framework, but the work to be done in terms of my roadmap perspective is kind of lacking these items in terms of, who has the responsibility, or in terms of the timeline, in terms of from the framework itself, to implement some of the items or the recommendations that are there. So it's just broad. It's a framework, it's there, but enforcement, roadmap, timelines, and different things like that is missing.
If I may, because that's me, and I think that is why when we looked at the document said the adoption, to the effect, the adoption of IPv6 immediately, but immediately was quite a while back. Yes. But because immediately maybe did not say by 2026, 2027, we have that sort of issue. So I think we may need to be a bit more deliberate in setting those sort of marks, saying you are responsible and this should get done by. I know we spoke about the gentle nudging instead of the mandating, but sometimes mandating is how you actually get things done. I do want to get your take, though, on because one of the things you pointed out was that of online safety, and I imagine the safety of the youngsters, the children, is key in there as well. One of the challenges that we face is the devices, the routers, that are issued by the service providers to households, where these parents, they're unable to do simple filtering or any content, anything on there. Again, is this something that the CTU can nudge the service providers to consider changing up a little bit? Or are we going to throw it back on the CCS cap and say, hey, that is covered there, so maybe through the heads of state, something ought to be implemented? I'd love to hear your take on that.
If I could clarify the comment about the routers here just now, your suggestion was that the customer have some facility to configure it or something of the sort?
Yes, because, and when you spoke about the responsibility of the ISPs in terms of the traffic, the content on their network. Yes. My thing is, in Grenada, for example, you can't ban pornography from the ISP end. It's not illegal to adults, right? But it is a problem when it comes to minors. Yeah. So the responsibility is shifted, and that's what we're seeing internationally, to the service providers of the content, not the person here, not the flow, not the digital, to ensure that they have some form of verification. Now, my thing is, when you go and you sign up for internet access, whether it's through Flow or digital, what have you, they give you a router, but you can't implement simple content filtering and so on there. So if we're looking at security as part of internet governance and protection of the youngsters, then I just want to get your take on whether or not we should have something in the framework or something that says to the service providers, again, maybe as a minimum specification for the equipment they provide, that your equipment should allow for X, Y, and Z to be implemented.
All right, let me ask a question there then. So what I see, the way that seems to be addressed at present is they may have passwords on certain channels. They have parental controls, and they block even the content on certain channels. When I say that, like from the program guide, right? They don't advertise the information on certain channels, the programs on certain channels that might be restricted. Would that be you're talking about filtering beyond those?
So I'm not talking about the television programs, and I'm talking about the websites.
Yeah,
the
I
Red
understand.
Tube and the Pornhub and these sort of things.
Oh, okay.
Right. So should the subscriber have the ability to implement certain filtering on the equipment that is given? Because I think it is unfair to tell the service provider that, hey, you should not, get pornography in front of the minors, right? But at least provide something that allow for parents to implement certain level of controls. And in Grenada, we don't have that. You can't even turn on a guest network on the equipment that they provide you. You have to purchase something else. So I'm saying as part of a minimum specification, do you think that probably we should have something, whether in the framework or something else, or are we throwing it back and say it's going to be covered under the CCS cap? A document I'm pretty familiar with, by the way.
Okay, I think I get the clarity now. Did Yashi want to make a comment? An intervention?
Yes, no, it's a good suggestion, but I don't know if it's practical, because I believe you're in the tech sector, but majority of parents will not be able to filter out websites on behalf of their children. Very likely they're going to turn to the children to figure out how to implement a filter. So I understand what he's saying, but I don't see it as a practical solution for the majority of population that will be grappling with this issue.
There's also the other side of it where I actually know someone who did it, but she is in the African region. She's an engineer. And 2 days later, her child got around it. So she's monitoring him online and seeing that he's online when he should not have access. And she could not figure out how he got access. So there's also the other side of it where by creating these barriers, we actually build their capacity to overcome them. And it also raises the question of who's responsible for that level of cybersecurity. In some areas, the service provider thinks it's the parent who should be responsible for the child. Some parents think the service provider should have that responsibility. Some think the government should set what that level is.
I suppose that's the question.
Let me also add that what countries have sought to do at the national level is to implement age verification. So even, right, so there are several countries that have insisted if you're offering this kind of content, you have to have a means of verifying the age of the user. My understanding is that Internet Society, and if Christian is on, he can speak, they don't really support that because it effectively comes down to sort of filtering, blocking, what have you. And of course, there are concerns about privacy, right? If you're uploading government-issued credentials to a site, to an explicit site, then there are questions about privacy and so on that would come into play. But age verification is one approach that countries have taken, as opposed to putting the onus on a parent or a grandparent to figure out what sites to block, how to block, and that kind of thing for a child who is much more tech savvy. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bevel Woodard would like to chime in on this topic.
Just to give further support to the idea of at least including something like this in the policy. Since 2014, I believe the UK government had worked out a deal with the major ISPs in the UK to do some version of by default content filtering. So the issue and the point that Secretary General raised about non-technical users having challenging time of putting some of these settings in place was overcome by making it a default setting, and if you wanted to, you could turn it off. They went one step further and allowed for only adults to be able to access that setting. Of course, there are many ways to get around that, as you know, but once again, the idea was very simple. Start with protection in mind. And I think that's where the question was coming from, that some kind of measure that is appropriate for our environs, that comes at a policy level, would be in place by default to protect those who don't know that they need protection or that they can be protected. And I would definitely advocate for that. And that was 2014. There have been a number of other jurisdictions since then that have gone on that road with arrangements with providers. Some went to the extreme of making it a precondition for the license, which again, if that may be necessary in the region, is something that can be considered. But in every case, it didn't come from a commercial interest making a moral choice. It came from a social interest making a moral imposition on the commercial provider. And I think we should have some kind of language to reflect that as a preferred or recommended position in the context of the updated policy document.
Thank you.
I saw a hand on the table there. Yes.
All right, this is just to further reinforce in terms of basically protecting persons from themselves. But going a little bit deeper from the awareness perspective with the policy, and I remember seeing a slide previously in the early parts, we spoke about the persons that are not reached or the underserved, which is most likely elderly and children and so on. But from an awareness perspective, I am thinking about the introduction of cyber hygiene into the school curriculum from a very young age, right? So across the different countries or so, let's say within the ECCU, is it something that can be brought into policy to bring in cyber hygiene into the forefront from a very young age, so that by the time, you know, they get to adolescent age and different things like that, that they are well learned around the different do's and don'ts when it comes to cybersecurity?
I think somebody said something like that yesterday, that you're putting these devices in children's hands and, you know, you're not letting them, without necessarily having the wherewithal to protect themselves. So, point noted.
We have Deidre Williams online. Deidre.
Oh, Deidre online?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm using an unfamiliar device.
Yes, we can.
Okay. To the previous speaker, great. Yes. Teach them to be street smart is more effective than putting up barriers to protect them that they climb over. If you dig down to the bottom, is about protecting people. It's not about protecting technology. It's about protecting people. So perhaps we need to start thinking about it the other way around. Instead of to go to the people and see what's causing a problem for them, and build what you want to build on top of that. My memory of the policy framework goes back, I think, to its very beginning. And I remember initially being really surprised because it was all full of technology and there weren't any people there. Over time now, it has evolved, and more the people are there as a consideration of the policy framework. I don't know if I'm making very good sense, but to me, that seems to be an extremely important question. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for that. I think we've certainly expanded or enhanced the people aspect over the years. from just mainly public awareness and capacity building in the original to maybe flesh it out some more. So that's noted and appreciated. Okay, any more? Yes, I have another question on the table there. Very good.
Good afternoon. Okay, it's just, I don't think it's a question, it's more of a comment for consideration. While we're looking into cybersecurity, which could also come in the form of creating barriers online to help people stay safe, I think we should also think about the persons with disabilities, because this could form a digital barrier for them. So I'm not sure how that could be incorporated, but I think we also need to look towards that path as well.
Yes, where do we have persons with disabilities in that thing?
Under reach the people we usually miss.
Under where?
Reaching the people we usually miss. So persons who are vulnerable. Children, the elderly, persons with disabilities.
Oh, that came out of the consultation.
Yes.
Right, but I think in the policy framework there may also be another area where that has been mentioned, but I can't say for certain. But the point is taken. We'll take that on board to make sure that we include, as appropriate, the requirements of persons with disabilities as well. But there was a comment in the recent consultation on it as well, so we will pick that up.
We also have a comment online from Mavis Johnson-Colley. While I do think there should be some reference included in the policy framework, there should be a separate policy on data governance because of how expansive it can be.
From the Bahamas, Mavis Johnson-Colley. Thank you, Mavis, for that. So we have one opinion that thought that data governance, since it's not always online, could have its own separate policy, notwithstanding that there could be mention of it in the policy framework. So maybe the policy framework for internet governance could say something like, we need to develop a data governance policy that is comprehensive and that would also cover whatever is online. Okay, so that's one opinion, and we're open to more. All right, you've been through your consultations, yes?
Yes.
All right, folks. I think we eventually were able to draw out a few comments, which was good, especially since the audience was such that they really didn't have the background. So it probably took a little while for some thoughts to germinate and so on. So given that you did not have the background, I would say thank you for the interventions made, the points noted. That would help us in further evolving the document. But I'll also encourage you to go deeper, right? You've now started thinking about this thing. Look at the documents that have been made available. Even in this meeting, we still have one more day when we would be here at this 22nd Caribbean Internet Governance Forum. So maybe in the next day or so, something else might come when you look at the documents, and you'll have the opportunity to intervene and let us know. But even so, since the documents have been available, go through them and return the comments as mentioned via the various options. The easiest one to remember is CIGF@ctu.int. Right? So if you have a specific comment on anything that comes after, you can always email it in or contact us in some other way. All right, but so for the time being, I would say, as we kind of approaching 5 o'clock, we could probably bring to a close the workshop activity for this afternoon. We'll take your notes, and tomorrow afternoon, towards just before the end, we'll put it into everything that we would have gathered over the last couple of days, and explain to you how we would take your comments into account going forward. So with that, I'll bring this part of the program to a close and invite our MC back to take us to the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nigel Cassimire and Ms. Shanea Lewis. Thank you. You know, one of the questions I have in mind, and I probably will raise it tomorrow and for perhaps a response, how do we find some sort of balance if governments were to regulate the internet, but knowing at the same time that their regulation could move into a form of censorship and control? How do we find the balance where that is concerned? But that's a whole different conversation by itself. All right, so we are going to wrap things up. A reminder to our visitors and individuals staying at the hotel, the transport for the cruise on board the Ecstasy leaves the hotel at 6:30 this evening at the front lobby. Please leave your name at the registration desk to ensure you are on the bus, all right? To locals, boarding time 7 p.m. and, of course, sailing from 8 p.m. You're welcome to join us as well. Day 3, the final day, is also packed with insightful information. A very exciting Grenada focus session is planned for tomorrow, and an open forum where you get to interact with the speakers and fellow participants. Alrighty, so please be mindful of that. For those going to the cocktails, see you later. And for everyone else, get home safely. That's all for day 2. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.